So a little known fact about me as a Weiss player, even among people that go to my local card shop, is that the first deck that I played in Weiss Schwarz was Angel Beats. And this was back in late 2012 when I was still playing Card Fight Vanguard as my main game, when I was still playing at Destination. The store owner at Destination brought me over to check out like the new set that came out, which was at the time Angel Beats Extra Booster Volume 2. And he had me learn the rules, try out a deck, and I ended up liking it a lot, and I ended up buying Angel Beats as my first deck. So the thing is, though, is that Angel Beats build that I've been playing for these last like 5 years or so was the music build, running cards like these: 2-1 Iwasawa, 3-2 Yui, cards like that. Randall playing a music deck. Wow, who could have guessed? Yeah, so I never actually got to try out a good stuff build with just like all of like the best cards. And also another reason that I wanted to try out this deck and this build is because recently, like I think within the last like 6 months or so, this level 0 Yui Brainstorm came out. This card is really good for Angel Beats, and it's definitely one of the things that Angel Beats has been sorely lacking for these past like 5 years. So with this Yui Brainstorm, I decided to come up with a deck list that I thought was solid and that I would want to test out. And I asked a friend of mine at my locals if I could borrow a bunch of Angel Beats cards, which he let me. So quick shout out to Bryant for letting me borrow like 90% of this deck and letting me try this out at locals. Thanks, Bryant. And so yeah, I haven't been testing this out for too long, but it feels pretty solid to me, and I felt like I should give you guys a deck profile on Angel Beats with the updated list with the Yui Brainstorm. I was actually like looking around on YouTube to see if anybody had uploaded an Angel Beats deck list with the new Yui Brainstorm, and nothing came up. So yeah, I definitely think that the Yui Brainstorm fills in a huge gap that Angel Beats has been missing for a long time. The only other thing that I really want for Angel Beats is a 1-0 costless counter. It can even be like a vanilla counter. I just really think a 1-0 costless counter would help out the deck a lot. But anyways, let's get to talking about the deck. So we'll start at the level 0. I run 17 level 0s here. We'll start with the 0-0 Kanade. She's a 0-0-2-5, and if you have one or less other characters on stage, she gets plus 1000 and Hand Encore. So this is a profile that we've seen more recently than this Kanade on cards like 0-0 Chitoge. The profile is not the best. Recently we're seeing a lot of cards that are like 0-0-3-5 level 1s, and I would rather have like level 1 over the Hand Encore. But the Hand Encore can still be useful if you draw an opening hand full of like level 3s. As long as you open this card, you can play it. And then if your opponent can kill it in battle, or like with a Suicider that doesn't send her off the field, then you can encore her by discarding your higher level cards and then just keep her on the board, which is nice. Obviously it's not optimal, but this is the best, in my opinion, this is the best turn 1 play that this deck has to offer. Now the next level 0 is something that a lot of people that I played against actually had like never seen this card, and I'm pretty sure like no one really played this card like ever. But this is a 0-0 Takamatsu. It's from the trial deck, and he's a 0-0-2-5 with On Death Pay to Salvage. Obviously, recently we see like On Death Pay to Salvage cards with like other effects like 0-0 Yo Suicider and Love Live Sunshine that have varied uses, and this card really only does one thing. But I think that in this deck it's very important that you can maintain your hand advantage. And you can afford to pay 2 stock to get a card in this deck, in my opinion. The deck's late game is very stock light, since you play the 3-2 Yuri, and then her Climax combo doesn't actually cost any stock to use. So you can afford to go into late game with like maybe like 5 or 6 stock and actually still be relatively fine with that. So I think that as long as you're maintaining your card advantage, even though you're using an effect like this that costs 2 stock, I think it's okay, and you can maintain a steady game plan. Now the next card, the new star of the show, is the Yui Brainstorm from the PR pack. So she's a tap self Brainstorm, which is very nice. It means you can use 2 of her in 1 turn, or you can tap her, and then also tap your Hand Encore Kanade in the same turn. And it's just a very, very nice addition to the deck. Her other effect is like the Married Life effect, where when you play a climax, you can choose one of your characters, give 1,000 power. It's just a nice bonus. Like you would play the Tap Self Brainstorm even if it was just a vanilla Tap Self Brainstorm, like for sure. But just being able to give extra power is a nice little bonus. So this is definitely a shining star that's bringing Angel Beats ever so slightly back into relevance. I run 3 copies of the Yui Suicider. So apart from being a level 0 Suicider, she has a continuous effect that says the character across from this cannot side. This has somewhat limited uses. Like usually at level 0, if your opponent is playing logically, they're going to front attack this anyway, because if they were to side it, like if they could side it, then that would mean that you're getting a +1 for free. So the logical move is to just kill it when you can. Now the cool thing that I actually never realized about this card until I was playing this deck now, like 5 years later, is that if you play the Yui Suicider at level 3, your opponent must front attack her, so that means you can use your free fresh counter, and they can't get a side attack in on this card to deal the same amount of damage but prevent you from using your refresh counter. So I think that's a nice little bonus that I actually hadn't thought about for the last like 5 years. But yeah, it's a Suicider. Like that's the main purpose of the card, is to just be a Suicider. In some ways it synergizes with the Kanade, because the Kanade needs 1 or less other characters on the board. So you can attack with the Kanade, crash with the Yui leaves the field, and then your Kanade plus like 1 other character, Kanade will go up to 3/5 power. So just like very standard tricks. This deck doesn't have anything super flashy. The last level 0 I run is 2 copies of the Otonashi Drop Salvager. This card is actually like completely busted for its time. Like I can't believe that this card was printed in like 2010. This card, it actually just like boggles my mind. So it is a 0025, and on play you can pay 1, discard 1, salvage any death character, and then until the end of the turn he gets plus 1,000 power. So obviously in this day and age we have completely busted drop salvagers like 00 Saya and Bang Dream. Like that's probably the best example that I can come up with. We have like drop searchers with like on play filter and like Sympho gear. Like drop searchers, drop salvagers these days are like potentially like super busted, but for its time, for 2010, this card was really good, and even now this card is very useful just as a drop salvage outlet, hand fix, stock out. Honestly, like it doesn't need the 1k power at all. It could just be a drop salvager and it would do its job, but having the 1k power gives it some extra use during the early game if you want to try to run over your opponent's oversized characters, which I think is a nice little extra. So that's it for the level 0s. Moving on to the level 1s. So this is where the like the Angel Beats part of this deck starts, and it all revolves around this card right here. So I run 2 copies of the Kanade, sending everyone off. It gives Hand Encore to all of your other death characters, and you can rest herself to choose one of your characters, and this turn it gets 1,000 power. So the thing about Hand Encore, if you guys all watch my Roselia deck profile, then you guys would know how strong or how highly I think of Hand Encore. Now the thing is that Hand Encore is only as good as the cards that you can bring back with the Encore effect. And you look at Roselia, and Roselia has access to really nice cards that you can Encore and get really good value out of, like 1-0 Yukino Climax combo. This deck does not have cards like that. Like not only does this deck not have any 1-0 level 1 Climax combo at all, but like just the cards that you're going to be playing throughout most of the game are pretty much vanillas. And this card, if it were in like any other set right now, this card would be absolutely ridiculous, because there are a lot of things that you can do with Global Hand Encore in a lot of the sets that are being played right now. However, in Angel Beats, this set that was printed in 2010 to like 2012, a lot of these cards are just in the scope of like today's metagame for Weiss Schwarz, these cards just actually just do nothing. But being able to just hand encore even like the cards like these, just by getting like crap zeros out of your hand like this, like there's still value in that, and I still think that this is the best way to play Angel Beats level 1 game. So let's get into the other level 1s now. We have the 1-0 Sheena. So she's a 1-0 5k, and once per turn, when you use a startup ability, she gets plus 1500 until the end of the turn. So on your turn, you have startups like the Yui Brainstorm and the Kantai 1-0, and you can use that to boost her up to, like if you use the Kantai effect, then you can boost her up to maybe like 7-5 power. She can swing over some relatively high level ones. On the defense, we mostly are going to be using the Yuri counter from the trial deck in order to activate the act ability. The next level 1 that I run is this 1-0 Kantai from the trial deck. So she's a 1-0 5k, and then during your turn, for each of your other death characters, she gets plus 500 power. So on a full board, she reaches 7k on the offense. She's extremely likely to die on the defense because nothing in this deck gives like continuous power on the opponent's turn. So most of the time, what you're going to be doing is like you play her, you play this in the back row, you kill your opponent's level 1 because she's really big on offense. She dies because she's really small on defense. You encore her by discarding some crappy 0 that you don't need, and then she can just swing over stuff again. And that's pretty much the strategy for like all 6 of these level 1s. Like these are your main front line, and you want to be able to just trade your opponent constantly for resources, and then hopefully you can use your tap self brainstorms and then also your 8 gate climaxes to replenish those resources, and then just try to at least deal some damage, make your way into the mid and late game. It's a very ordinary deck strategy. So the level 1 counter is a scaling counter. So depending on what level you're at, it will give more power to your characters. So if you use it at level 1, it's a 2k counter. If you use it at level 2, it's a 2-5 counter. And if you use it at level 3, it's a 3k counter. It's like a pretty decent card. Honestly, I say that I would love to have a costless counter so I don't have to pay stock to buff my characters. But at the same time, being able to pay 1 stock is sometimes useful so that you can dig your climaxes out of your stock. That being said, this card, it's fine. Like honestly, like having a scaling counter is better than having just a 1-1 2k vanilla counter, and it's what you can use at like any stage of the game if you want to keep your characters alive. One of the most important cards for the deck is the level 1 event, Operation Tornado. So this effect is more recently known on the 1-0 Kasumi event in Bang Dream, because those 2 cards have basically the same effect, but this is like the original version. So Brainstorm, you flip over the top 3 cards of your deck and then send them to waiting room, and then you salvage a death character whose level is equal or lower to the number of death characters you milled. So let's say you brainstorm 3 and all 3 cards are death characters. You can salvage any death character level 3 or lower, so like any death character from your waiting room. However, if you use Operation Tornado and you flip over like 1 climax, another Operation Tornado, and 1 death character, then you would salvage a death character that's level 1 or lower. This card is, in my opinion, like automatic 4 of in every Angel Beats deck. You need this in order to control your deck size so that you can refresh optimally. So Operation Tornado in combination with the Yui Brainstorm, these are the only ways that you can efficiently mill through your deck, because this deck has like no other options for free mill. And then obviously once you hit like level 2 and later, you do have access to using the refresh counter, but in ideal situation, you don't have to use this. Okay, so yeah, Operation Tornado, definitely a very important card. It's very important to remember that this is a Brainstorm ability. So if you use this while you have exactly 3 cards left in your deck, or 3 or less cards, then those cards that you flip over will not go back in with the refresh. So let's say you have 3 cards left in deck, you play Operation Tornado, and the last 3 cards of your deck have like 2 climaxes. Well, those 2 climaxes are not going back in with your refresh, so you have to be very careful about how you use this card. Okay, so moving on to the level 2s, I play 1 copy of the Yui Changer. It changes into the 3/2 healer. Usually I just do this change so that I can get good value going into like level 2, level 3 game. If you change into the 3/2, then you have a solid 2-soul body that hopefully will stay on the board for the rest of the game, because ideally you can just encore it every turn. However, these days there are a lot of decks that run anti-change stock Suiciders or clock Suiciders or bottom deck Suiciders that can remove this from the field. And as a result, you have to think about which games you want to use the changer to bring out the level 3 and which ones you don't. So you have to plan for that. But for the decks that aren't able to deal with this card by removing it from the board through like one of those effects like stock Suicider, clock Suicider, then you can maintain a 2-soul body going from mid-game into late game, and then if your opponent is able to kill it by having higher power, then you can encore it and discard like any of these random cards that you don't need. And so it's just a nice like middle ground between having no level 2 game and having like standard early play healers that a lot of decks these days can play. I run the 2 copies of the Sheena counter. So she's a 2/5 punch, and then she also has the pay 2 extra stock to free fresh your deck effect. I run 2 copies of this just in case like one of them gets stuck in stock. Pretty much you never want to like have this card in your hand if you don't need it at the time. Usually you want this in your waiting room so that if you like trigger a bunch of gate climaxes, then you can salvage the Sheena and then have it readily available for you to use on that turn. Apart from that, in terms of just being used as a counter, the Yuri counter is actually a better counter to be using because once you hit level 2, which is the level when you can start using the Sheena counter, the Yuri counter is also 2/5 counter because it scales up based on your level. And then also once you hit level 3, this one's actually a stronger counter than the Sheena counter. So you pretty much only want this for like those emergency situations where you trigger a bunch of gates, you salvage it, and then you want to reset your deck. Okay, so moving on to the level 3s now, I run 4 copies of the Yuri Nakamura 3/2 Climax combo. So this is one of the cards that came out in Angel Beats Re-Edit. And I remember when Angel Beats Re-Edit first came out, this card was like 40 bucks in Japanese, like it was 4,000 yen, and I had no idea why. And looking back on when it was $40, I still have no idea why, because this card is not exactly like anything special, I guess. Probably just because like the burn is free, it's on a gate combo, Japan loves gates, probably something like that. But anyway, so what this card does is on play, you can draw up to 2 cards and discard a card, and then climax combo with this gate, Core of the World, you burn 1, and then until the end of the opponent's next turn, this gets plus 1500 power. So it becomes an 11k. The extra power is like fine that you get, but you like obviously you're mainly just playing this for the burn 1. The nice thing about this deck is that if you draw into multiple copies of Core of the World, you have the 1/0 Kanade to potentially encore your Yuris so that you can use their combo multiple times, multiple turns in a row, which is pretty nice. And that's actually one advantage that this deck has over other decks, I guess. But this is also assuming that you can last 2 turns at level 3. And a lot of decks right now in the current era have significantly stronger finishers than those in like 2014 when Angel Beats Re-Edit came out. But it's definitely still nice to have that option. This deck is like a very, this card is a very like solid but ordinary finisher in that it can like dig for its own climax, and then it just has like a free burn for 1. So It's definitely a very, I guess, boring card, but it's a very solid card, and it's basically like the best finisher option for like playing multiple copies in Angel Beats. So you definitely want to run 4 of this. And then, as I said earlier, I run 2 copies of the Yui Healer. So apart from healing, she also has a climax combo with this gate, which is after the battle. When this attacks, you can pay 1 stock to salvage a character in your waiting room, and then also choose any of your characters, and until the end of the opponent's next turn, it gets plus 3,000 power. So you could use this on herself in order to make sure that she lives through the next turn, like if you're like level 2 or something, and your opponent has like level 3 killers. Or you can use it on the Yuri level 3 burner so that she can stay alive until the end of the opponent's next turn. Although honestly, it's not too big of a problem because you have Encore. You can Encore any of these anyway if your opponent can reverse them in battle. So the 3k power, mostly what it would be used is to prevent your opponent's reverse effects at like level 3. So let's say you buff this to like 13k power, then and your opponent has like a reverse finisher, but they can only reach like 12-5, or maybe if they can reach like 13, you have a counter. So that's basically like the only thing that this is used for. But ideally, at level 3, you're just playing the level 3 burn combo and killing your opponent, or at least like attempting to kill your opponent. So this combo doesn't get used very much. This level 3 Yuri is a very interesting card. So she has 2 effects. First one being character cross gets -1 soul. A lot of players don't like the character cross -1 soul because it gives your opponent more opportunities for perfect damage, or like swinging for perfect damage for lethal, things like that. But the main purpose of why we're playing this card is for the second ability, for its finisher potential. So when this Yuri attacks, you can pay 4 and kill as many of your characters as you want, up to 4. Choose up to 4 of your other characters, and then you deal X damage to your opponent, where X is the number of characters that you sacked. So I guess in the most ideal finishing turn, you play like 2 copies of Yuri with climax combo, and then you also play 1 copy of this Yuri, and then you attack with these 2 first, and then depending on how much damage your opponent is at, you can use Yuri for a chance at exact lethal on your opponent. Now the stock cost in order for you to do that, play 2 Yuri, 2 of this Yuri, 1 of this, is you have to start your turn with 8 stock, assuming that you aren't using any stock on things like Brainstorm or things like that, because you need 6 to play the 3 Yuris, and then you also need 4 when she attacks in order to use the effect. So you're going to be attacking with these 2 first, and that's going to bring you up to 4 stock, and then you're going to use her ability. And this ability was actually recently printed onto Jabba the Hutt in Star Wars, but Jabba the Hutt is significantly different in many ways. First of all, Jabba the Hutt is a healer, which is very nice. Secondly, Jabba the Hutt activates at the start of the Encore step, which means that you can generate a stock with your 3rd attack and then use Jabba's effect, whereas this one you have to use the ability on attack. So Jabba the Hutt you can use with 1 less stock than the 3/2 Yuri. And then another thing that's really nice about Jabba the Hutt is that you can use his effect from the back row. So if you put him in the back row, you can like sack all your characters in the front row, and then as a result you can prevent your opponent from doing any on-reverse abilities on the following turn, assuming the opponent lives, because you just cleared your entire front row. This one, she can't even sack herself, so if your opponent doesn't have anything lower than this Yuri's power level, then she's going to be sticking around, and she's basically a free reverse target for your opponent to kill on their following turn. All in all, this card is a very nice, even comparing it to Jabba the Hutt, obviously like Jabba the Hutt is like a really good card. And comparing Yuri to Jabba, Yuri seems like a significantly worse card. But Yuri, like just in the context of this deck, is a very solid card to go along with your other finishers, and she lets you go for precision numbers in the late game, which is just a very nice tool to have. Now the last level 3 I play is this 3/2 Yui, and I run this as a 1 of tech. I think this card is extremely strong. It can win you certain matchups like by default just by like playing the card, just because all of the abilities that this 3/2 Yui has are just very strong for countering certain decks. Specifically, the decks that this card is very good against are ones that have like money counters or rest counters or things like that. And all 3 of her abilities work to counter those strategies. So let's take a look at what she does. First of all, she's hexproof. So you play her and you attack with her, your opponent cannot money counter her. So that's very nice. Her second ability is on play. You can choose up to 2 of your other characters, and until the end of the turn, they get plus 1,000 power and plus 1 soul. So this is another way to counter those like money rest counter strategies. Let's say you play 3/2 Yuri and you play 3/2 Yui and you use the climax combo. You can use the Yui, give plus 1 soul to the 3/2 Yuri, and then you can now side your opponent's level 3s for 1 damage and also burn for 1 damage, and you're completely avoiding their money counter so you can still get your damage in. And the third effect she has is when she attacks, you can pay 1 and discard 1, and if you do, choose one of your opponent's characters in the front row, send it back to the opponent's hand, and until the end of the turn, this gets plus 1,000 power. So you can open up lanes for your other characters to direct attack to not only potentially modulate higher damage for you because you're clearing up the column for a direct attack, but you're also making more opportunities for your characters to play around those money counters or those rest counters. And so this card is just like a super hard counter to decks like that. Like I played against, like the one tournament that I played this deck in, I played against the Capo round 4. He had money counter in hand, and I searched this out at like level 1, or like I salvaged this. Like I hit a gate at level 1, and I was just looking through my waiting room, and then I saw this card, and I immediately just salvaged it because I knew that this card was going to be extremely effective going into late game and allowing me to play around my opponent's late game defensive strategy. It's also extremely good, like I said, against things like rest counters. So if you ever play against a deck like 3/2 Osomatsu, or 2/3, not 3/2, 2/3 Osomatsu-san rest counter, or the Tolovru Animals rest counter, or ReZero rest counter, you can use this card against things like that as well. And then, of course, if you're playing against a deck that has like an on-reverse ability to deal damage on either player's turn, then you can use this to bounce those cards, and your opponent just doesn't get a chance to use those abilities on you. So like common cards in the current state of the game that would do an effect like that is like 3/2 Mikasa, because on either player's turn she can pay 2 stock to burn 1. And so this card just is very flexible. It has a lot of application in many different matchups. Like even in matchups where you're not using her to avoid like rest counter or money counter, just being able to bounce an opponent's character and modulate soul is very, very significant and can potentially win you a lot of games. So I think that this is a card that I actually underestimated for an extremely long time, but more recently I've come to see that this card has a lot of uses against a lot of matchups and has very very much like unseen potential in my eyes. So that's pretty much the deck. I plan to do a bit more testing with this build, but I think that this is like a fairly optimal setup for this deck. Obviously, this deck cannot be played in English, unfortunately, because English does not have the 0/0 Yui Brainstorm. So for those of you that are looking for a build to play for Angel Beats in English, sorry, you can't really run this deck. But yeah, it's very vanilla, but still quite solid. And if you guys want to give this build a shot, or if you guys want to suggest any changes that I can make to this deck or any cards that I overlooked, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And I'll be sure to look at those, get back to you guys. Maybe we can have a little bit of discussion about options in this deck. But yeah, that concludes my Angel Beats deck profile. And until next time, this has been Peshcats. Bye.